What is historical theology? Well, if you remember, we have talked about the four branches of theology. You've got biblical, systematic, historical, and philosophical. Now, we've talked about biblical and systematic theologies, the methods, what are they there for, how do people use them, what are the benefits and the dangers. Today, we're going to be focused on historical theology. So, historical theology attempts to answer the question, what has the church thought or taught about a certain doctrine throughout the course of history? And historical theology traces the doctrines that are taught, condemned, and kind of debated throughout the history of the church. And they follow that trajectory to our present age, which is it's really interesting to look at because we've got these doctrines from 1700 years ago that are directly affecting us. And then you've got like reformulations of these doctrines that were condemned as heresy. And it's just really interesting to see the formation and the trajectory of all these doctrines. So we're going to go over a danger of historical theology, and then we're going to go over a couple of the benefits of doing historical theology. So first, what is a danger of doing systematic theology? Well, I guess the only danger that I'm going to be talking about today is we can put too much weight on tradition. Too much weight on tradition. And, this is a problem that Catholics have. They put too much authority onto the church fathers. And then that it becomes like the same level as the Bible. And that's dangerous. So just because a church father said something, that doesn't mean you have to believe it. Just because the church fathers condemned something doesn't mean that's false, right? We need to take what they say and we need to take what they did and apply it to scripture and not apply it to scripture, match it up with scripture to see, is what they're telling me true? Does it match up with scripture? Does it line up? So the goal in doing historical theology is to understand what the church has taught and thought and debated, but it is not to be the foundation of our theology. The foundation of our theology is scripture. But historical theology is a good supplement for that to help us understand it. Especially since historical theology is very clarifying, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it doesn't match the authority of Scripture. It's just a bunch of dudes talking about theology. Now, what are a few benefits of historical theology? Well, first, it helps identify heresy. And in case you don't know, heresy is basically just a false theological belief, something that has been condemned by the historical church. Now, the way that historical theology kind of helps us identify heresies is because there are no new interpretations of scripture. Everything is simply just a reformulation of some previous interpretation. Now, when we look at church history, we can see some of these interpretations show up when they were first thought of, when they were first introduced. And we can see these interpretations being condemned by the church. And then we get a really cool look on it because we get to see what both sides are saying, and then we get the full picture. So what happens is we see let's just take Arianism, for example. If you don't know what Arianism is, I made a video about it when I was talking about the Trinity. But Arianism basically, very complex, but basically Jesus isn't God. Jesus came into existence. He's not eternal. So, um, so let's just take Arianism. So we can see what the Arians are saying about Jesus, what verses they're using, what arguments they're using, and then we can see the Trinitarians, and we can see them kind of clash, and we can figure out why the Trinitarians thought that Arianism was heresy. And so, um, let's just take Jehovah's Witness, for example, right now. So Jehovah's Witnesses are just a reformulation of Arianism, which was condemned in the 4th century after about 50 years of deliberation and arguing. And the church has basically been unanimous in its understanding that Jesus is eternal and that Jesus is God. So anything outside of that is considered heresy. It's a false belief, and so we reject it. So when we look at historical theology, we can see what they thought about this belief about Arianism. And we can see here are all the reasons for rejecting it, so then we reject it as well after we match it up with Scripture. And then if we see that Arianism falls flat, we reject it just the same as they did. Now, another benefit to historical theology is that it removes this desire for individuality. So in Western culture, we are very individualistic, very individualistic, and often we can interpret the Bible through the eyes of a 21st century theologian. And this often clouds our judgments, right? Because we are living in a very, very particular context. And if we interpret the Bible based on the context we are living in now, we aren't going to get the full picture. And we're probably just going to take the passage completely out of context. Now, historical theology kind of breaks that pattern, right? And it shows how the Bible has been kind of interpreted through many different environments and situation and contexts, right? So when we read or study historical theology, we see how the church has interpreted certain scripture and how they have formulated certain doctrines in their particular contexts. So it's not enough to just read, I don't know, John Calvin or Martin Luther's works and then call it quits. We need to know what is the context surrounding them. And when we do that, we gain different insights from people who study these scriptures that are not in Western context, and then opens our eyes to a whole new set of ways to interpret it and let it affect our lives. Now, the last benefit I'm going to talk about is that it motivates us to be faithful Christians. And the reason for that is because right now we are living in a very hostile climate to real Christianity. Now, notice I said real Christianity, because if you can put this inclusive spin on Christianity, then everybody's going to love you. But if you stand for what Christianity actually teaches, nobody's going to love you. They're very hostile to true biblical Christianity. And because of this, it can be scary to live our faith out in public. And historical theology helps with this, because when we look at the historical Christians, they were literally getting tortured, and they were literally getting killed for their faith. But they didn't water down the gospel. The historical Christians didn't change the gospel to kind of fit the narrative of their culture. They were anti-cultural. They preached the gospel the way that the gospel was supposed to be preached, and they didn't water anything down. And their message didn't waver, even though they were being tortured and killed and were afraid to stand up for biblical Christianity because someone might make a bad post about us, or someone at my job's going to make fun of me. Well, when we study church history, it motivates us to kind of follow these examples of early Christians. And it motivates us to get in the public square regardless of the consequences. And it motivates us not to change or water down the gospel so that it'll be easier for people to swallow. Because then it's not the gospel, because now you've changed it. Right? So reading about the martyrs and reading about these people who knew the consequences and they would stand up for their faith and didn't change anything to make people love them or like them more. That should motivate us. And that's a good reason why you should study historical theology. Now, I'm going to give you a couple recommended resources. The first of which is Greg Allison's book, Historical Theology. Now, this book, as soon as you get into theological books, you're not going to find any that are small. The Historical Theology by Greg Allison is a big book, but it's a very, very easy read. He's a great writer. And that he just focuses on the doctrine and kind of formulates it, or shows how it was formulated, and then he just goes through each section of each part in time and then shows how it relates to our doctrine now. So it's really good. Second, I would suggest Justo Gonzalez's The Story of Christianity. Now, these are also big books, but they're in 2 volumes. And they don't focus too much on the doctrines. He focuses more on the historical context surrounding the church. And like I said earlier, this is very important when studying theology, or specifically historical theology, because if we just take these doctrines and divorce it from the historical context they're living in, we're missing a huge part in that. We're missing a huge part of the formulation of this doctrine. So I would suggest both of those books together. Justo Gonzalez is a really great writer as well. So I would suggest both of those books for you. And that's all I got for you. So Lord willing, I'll see you in the next one. God bless.